Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. I'm Tony Bodoh.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer, and we're super glad you're here today.
Yes, today we have a wonderful guest, Sid Banerjee. I've known Sid for, 13 or 14 years now.
All right.
And we've gone back quite a ways there. And we're going to have a great conversation today about listening to your customer and the technology around that. But I'll let Betsy do a more formal introduction of Sid.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this conversation because it's just exactly what we talk about all the time in terms of listening to your customer. And this takes it to a whole new level. So I can't wait to have this conversation. So Sid, thank you for being here. We're so glad you're here.
Well, thank you, Betsy and Tony. I appreciate the opportunity to chat and share a little bit of my passion and I'm sure connect with yours.
Yeah. So Sid, you are the founder, vice chairman, and chief strategy officer for Clarabridge. So tell us a little bit about how you got to this point in your career, and then tell us about Clarabridge.
Happy to do that. So Clarabridge has, as a company, been around for about 14 years now. We started the business, actually almost 15 years now, started back in 2008. In my prior life, before Clarabridge, I had worked in a couple of companies doing data analytics and data warehousing and helping companies really understand and tame all the data that exists across the enterprise. But the big idea that led to the creation of Clarabridge was we really wanted to try to apply data analysis principles and best practices to the world of unstructured information. And specifically, after playing around with a couple of different domains and data sets, we really focused on the unstructured information that is generated when customers are talking to companies or when customers are reviewing products and services in communities and forums on social media, or when they're doing any kind of business over a phone call or a chat or any type of interaction media, basically. So we built a product and a set of analytic techniques to really collect and transform all of that unstructured conversational and feedback information into the kinds of analytics and insights that help businesses identify what drives loyalty, what keeps customers happy, what product or service issues are causing problems, so that they can be more responsive to their businesses and to their customers, and ultimately build better relationships with their primary buyers and users of products and services.
So Sid, tell us a little bit about each stop along the way in your career and how your journey professionally got you so interested in the work you do today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes get asked that question. It's been very much a journey. When I first started in the world of sort of business, I after about 5 or 6 years out of college, actually ended up working with a company called MicroStrategy. They're a business intelligence data analytics company that was started by a couple of friends of mine actually from college. And over a period of about 9 years, I learned a lot about how to really apply quantitative techniques to helping businesses really collect and understand what's going on in their business by really analyzing the data, sales data, financial data, all kinds of compliance and risk data that exists in large organizations around the globe. But what became clear to me after about 8 or 9 years of doing that is that the real new kind of frontier for analysis was going to be tapping into the kinds of conversations that we're having right now, right? 2 people, 3 people talking, asking questions, problem solving, learning about things through just collecting and osmosising, if you will, all the conversational topics of a conversation. And I recognized that there was really no good technology that did that. There were search engines that could help you find things, and then there were analytics that were very much focused on data that you'd associate with a spreadsheet or rows and columns. And so what we tried to do when we started the company, and it was me and 2 co-founders, was we said, let's try to take language and turn it into data. And let's apply algorithms for extracting all the things that we think are important to analyze in language. And we quickly came up with a handful of what we call features now, right, that we wanted to extract: sentiment or business topics, more recently emotion, risk categories, customer intentions. What is a customer trying to do? Agent actions. What is a company doing back when a customer is asking for something? And as we've built these models out, we've developed essentially a map for the customer experience between a company and a customer. And those models, those maps are really what allow us to work with banks and retailers and health insurance companies, really any large company that really traffics in a lot of interactions with customers, to understand what's going on and to basically replace what would have historically been a human being leaning over the shoulder of an agent in a contact center or reading hundreds or thousands or millions of rows of survey feedback, right? We effectively automate that process and make it scalable and make it analytically robust and actionable.
Yeah, that goes back 14 years ago to when you and I first met. The reason we met was because I was working for Gaylord Entertainment, Gaylord Hotels at the time, and was very suddenly put in charge of customer experience and analytics in that space. I already owned all the other analytics for the company, but then they threw that at me unexpectedly. And I was like, I've never written a survey in my life. I have no idea. I avoided the psychology classes, but I knew technology and I knew I could learn. And so I met you and some of your team probably early 2007 at a conference, and within 6 months had a pilot in place, and our first analysis through that pilot, looking at 3 years of past data, we altered a $300 million decision that the company was going to make. And it was quite exciting to see that happen. And that was in the early days where we're just looking at, survey feedback, not even conversations. Sentiment was a bit of it. But I think back to those days and how rudimentary things were then, but how effective they were. And then I look to where we are today, and there's 3 or 4 major steps along the path. What would you say those steps have been?
Yeah, so there's been, it's interesting, by the way, and thank you, Tony. You were one of our first, probably I can count on one hand, maybe 2 hands at the most, who took the leap of faith when we were starting up Clarabridge and said, I'm not sure what these guys are doing, but I think it can help me. And, we now have hundreds of customers all over the globe, but it was those first kind of innovative people and companies that kind of took that leap of faith that got us to where we are today. I do think there were three key milestones that led to a business like Clarabridge actually having traction in the marketplace. The first was, and you kind of touched on it, back in the early 2000s, we were starting to see the first real wave of digitization of feedback, right? It wasn't that much earlier that when you thought about a survey, you thought about an index card, at your restaurant that you filled out while you were eating your food, or a piece of paper that the flight attendant handed you before you got off the plane. In the early mid-2000s, a lot of those feedback mechanisms became digitized because of the internet. You got an email invitation to fill out a survey, or you were popped up a survey on your webpage. And that digitization made it much easier to capture much larger amounts of data. The second was social media, right, which we kind of take for granted today, but social media was just starting to really morph into this platform for not just people to share pictures of their cats and dogs, but to actually talk about companies and businesses and to review products at scale. And so there was this explosion of information that companies had no control over, and they were scared, that these platforms could potentially shift sentiment away from being loyal customers. So they wanted to get a handle on that, and they were spending a fair amount of money to figure out how to tame that beast. And then the third I would say catalyst for this really becoming a business was when we started applying the Clarabridge idea and the platform to businesses like Gaylord's and to airlines and to retailers. What we quickly recognized was that we were really driving a fairly clear return on investment, right? We would be replacing a market research agency that was spending or charging, millions of dollars to basically read and code and generate, executive reports on customer feedback. And we were doing it not 3 to 4 months latency, but literally every day that new feedback was coming in, it was showing up on a report. And it was being done in an automated way. And it was a fraction of the cost what you would pay market research firms to do. We were able to quantify insights and opinions on social media in a way that nobody had ever done manually, because there was never a manual way to do that. And most importantly, when we could point out a problem that if you fixed would drive up more loyalty or reduce people canceling service, they would make those changes and we could actually see the impact of that change, right? One example that I remember from early on, we were working with an insurance company, and we pointed out that a good number of their calls into their contact center were coming from people trying to verify their primary care physician, right? And in the conversations between agents and the members of this insurance company, members were saying things like, I don't know why I couldn't find this. I was on your website, my doctor is John Smith, and he didn't show up even though he is in network. And it was because the Finder application on the website didn't recognize that John and Jonathan and a misspelled John were all the same person, right? And so we made the case to that customer that if they just upgraded their search function with a more robust fuzzy search capability, it might cost a few $100,000. It was going to save them hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the phone calls because those calls wouldn't come in. So deflecting calls, creating efficiency, and that trend has continued now with more and more people moving to digital and away from in-person. And for better or worse, the COVID pandemic that we're living through has meant that business is now trafficked online and in these virtual media like we're on right now. And so it's really important to be able to tap into what's happening on those conversations so that you can improve the business operations and get people to get the things they want done right the first time. That saves time, that saves money, and it frankly makes your customers happier too, because nobody wants to spend 2 hours doing what they could do in 10 minutes. And so it's important to kind of shrink that life cycle down and optimize the customer journey. And if you can help companies do that, they're going to get a ton of value from the solution that we give them.
Sid, that's a really great example for people like me that learn through hearing examples of how what you do impacts a company. Do you have any other examples of maybe another way that your technology is helping companies?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've got tons of them, but let me pick a couple of interesting ones. One that I find it's kind of humorous, but it points to, again, the impact of making good decisions during, high stakes investment decisions. We were working with one of the big airlines a couple of years ago, and they were merging, as is often happening in that business, two big airlines together to create one even bigger airline. And one of the things that they were doing as they were going through this process was rationalizing, do they take the meals from airline one and make them the standard meals? Do they take the frequent flyer clubs and make them the frequent flyer clubs of the whole thing? And even simple little things like, how do you board? You board back to front or through zones. Each airline had different ways of doing things. And so we worked with this airline during a period of about 9 to 12 months where they were trying to figure out which standard was going to become the company standard as the two airlines were integrating. And while we were doing that, we noticed that there was a big spike of negative feedback around coffee in the airplanes. And it was in the survey, so we were mining these surveys, and we recognized that there wasn't uniformly negative feedback on the coffee. It was only from certain customers on certain planes. And so we did further analysis, and we recognized that it was the airline customers from an airline that used to serve Starbucks that was now moving to a no-name brand. And specifically, when those customers were flying on the Starbucks planes, the coffee was doubly bad. And they recognized that what was happening was those airplanes were basically calibrated to pour more water in the coffee because it was a stronger brew when it was Starbucks. But when it flipped to the no-name, not only were they pissed off that they weren't getting Starbucks, but they were getting watered down no-name brand coffee, right? So they quickly recognized this was a major driver of negative NPS, right? I mean, our Net Promoter Score surveys, because the feedback was, your coffee is terrible. I got up at 5 a.m. to catch this flight, and now you're giving me this dirty water, basically. So they recalibrated the plane, those planes, to make the coffee stronger. The satisfaction went up a bit. The feedback went down. Eventually, they switched back to another high-end coffee brand. I won't mention whom, but all of this was driven by us mining feedback, from surveys mainly, but also from social media. It was a bit of they called it Coffeegate inside this company because it was kind of a big thing.
To me, what it struck me, it's kind of like customer feedback forensics, where you have to just dig in and figure out what's really going on. I love that story because how would you know that? I mean, you have to really investigate deeply.
And you're looking at like multiple dimensions of this problem. It's not just, you can find it staring at you in the face. You really have to mine the data. And that's what we love to do. So,
and it's oftentimes that in this data, you see something mentioned, but it may not be the problem that's being mentioned. That's the real problem. It's what's the root cause. And I think of one that we actually uncovered back, 10 years ago at Gaylord, or longer than that ago.
Yeah.
And it was, we recognized that we got higher satisfaction scores the higher up in the hotels. Those were 5, 6, 7-story hotels, massive places. But if the people stayed on the highest floors, they gave us the highest ratings versus the lowest floors.
Mm-hmm.
And so that changed operational strategies around how quickly do we fill the hotel, and we fill it from top down, et cetera. And that changed our satisfaction scores as well as our financial results, because we could even charge people more to stay on the higher floors potentially.
Yeah. Actually, I think I remember that particular finding. And one of the other sort of subtext to that, getting back to root cause, when you started, and we have this feature now we've put in the product called driver analysis. So it does sort of a multidimensional correlation of all the words and concepts that tend to correlate to positive and negative feedback, basically. And one of the drivers, at least in one of the Gaylord properties, was it was one of these courtyard style hotels. So all of the inner floors opened up to this big courtyard. And particularly on the weekends, they had live music, right? So the closer to the bottom of the floor, the more you heard the live music. As you got further up, you didn't hear it as much. And so sound proofing and insulation was a big driver for that as well. So it wasn't just the view. It wasn't
just the view, absolutely. And it's funny because there's so many different things like that. And I could go through a bunch of examples. We did, I don't know, in the 2.5 years that I ran the program there, hundreds of studies, and some of them weren't very effective. Others, we discovered some pretty amazing things that really shifted. So that was back then, and that was looking typically at purely survey data, satisfaction data, and we were able to bring in, with your team, bring in other elements like room number and rates and things like that. So we were able to put some dimensions on that data that allowed us to get some really good insights. But let's fast forward, because your company's come a long ways now. Clarabridge is looking at a lot of different stuff today than they did back then. So take us through a couple of the evolutions that you've seen in the space, because I think, some people may just be like, wow, I've never thought of like doing text analysis, and maybe they need to be at ground zero. But other people are so well advanced in this space now that they're really looking at a much different spectrum here.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the question. So one of the things that I think prepared us well to go beyond just traditional solicited or survey type feedback was when we started the company, way back in the 2008-9 timeframe. We didn't try to build a survey business. We tried to build basically a platform that you could connect any kind of feedback to. And early on, it was mostly surveys and social media and online reviews and the things that you would associate with what was available then that could be easily mined. But because we weren't tied to a single platform, we were always looking for other interesting things to connect to. And we did bring in, CRM data, the agent notes that people type when you're on a phone call. That led us to recognizing that if we could take audio data, from the actual call recordings when you call an agent and turn those into transcripts, you could then apply the same techniques. So about 3-4 years ago now, 2016 timeframe, we actually started supporting the collection and the mining of speech, so speech analytics. And that's actually become one of the highest growth drivers for the business over the last 2-3 years. I mean, that part of the business is growing 50 to 100% a year, depending on the year that you look at. The other thing that's been interesting is contact centers. You used to call them call centers. Nowadays, we call them contact centers because they aren't just about calls, right? The typical contact center agent could be on multiple messaging platforms, right? Apple Business Chat or Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. They could have proprietary chat platforms, and they're often the escalation point for automated chat, right? Chatbots that often act as the first intercept of any conversation that's online. So what we've done is we've essentially broadened the aperture, and we now bring in chatbot conversations. We bring in all kinds of public messenger and private messenger applications that are being used by agents to talk to customers. And so those all fall into the category of sort of contact center nowadays. And it's changed, a little bit the use case too, because now we're not just trying to figure out what was the feedback after somebody stayed and left a survey response. It's when you call in the moment, we want to know why you're calling. But if you've had prior interactions with that company, maybe you tried to self-serve, you filled out a pop-up survey, then you talked to a chatbot, the chatbot wasn't useful to you, and so you demanded to be connected to a human being. Not that that's ever happened to me, it has. And then you get on a chat conversation and, you're getting with somebody who's probably a hired partner, in some outsourced country, who doesn't really know the product or business, and eventually you get to a human being who can help you. That's a bad experience, right? Because you've now had 4 attempts, each one often making you more and more upset. And now you've got not just the problem, but the fact that the customer journey has been so suboptimal, you have an angry customer. And so what Clarabridge tries to do is collect all of those data sources, all of those interactions, and stitch them together. So we can identify when there's truly been more pain created than efficiency with all this explosion of contact center channels. And we try to help companies identify the moments of truth that make the difference between a conversation going in the right direction and going in the wrong direction, so that they can optimize those conversational venues and mediums, and then ultimately create more efficient and better outcomes conversations.
I don't think there's much more frustrating than getting caught in a loop and having to tell your story over and over and over again. Yeah. So, it's such a value add to the customers for a company to have this service so that you don't have to do that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We've created the other big evolution of Clarabridge, and I think of the general space of conversational and interaction analytics, is when we started the company, more than 10 years ago, AI, as you know it today, wasn't really ready for prime time. So most of the way that you tried to detect concepts and themes and different types of features from language was you literally hard-coded all the different things that you thought might conceivably come up in a conversation. And so it was a very laborious process to build the software. Starting about 5-6 years ago, we made a big bet on machine learning and kind of AI training algorithms. So instead of having to teach the machine all the conceivable ways that you might, ask for something or complain about something, we now take data set, we run it through these sort of unsupervised learning techniques, and it sort of looks for patterns. And we pick out the patterns we like, and we say we want to train the machine to recognize those things. And it's sort of like, I joke about this. It's like when you have a kid and you show the kid a football and you say ball, and you show them a baseball and you say ball, and you show them a basketball, and then they say ball because they've sort of seen the patterns that these are all objects you throw. We're effectively teaching the computer how to recognize all the different things that customers talk about when they have customer experiences and interactions. And that's allowed us to scale into industry models, into different language models around the globe. And it's allowed us to basically continue to accelerate the pace of innovation in the technology too.
Yeah, you mentioned industry models, and that was actually going to be my next question. Is there an industry where they are really, really embracing this and just like really taking off? Just an industry that is on the leading edge of this?
Yeah, well, there are a couple. I think, when you look at who's really doing CX, customer experience, it's generally, at least, using technologies like Clarabridge, generally big companies in businesses that have a very high count of customers and a high number of channels in which a customer can basically interact or do business. So that would, there's sort of 5 that we always see: retail, banking, insurance, both health and traditional P&C and auto. Consumer goods, particularly those that have a direct-to-consumer, channel and way of doing business, and tech companies, right? Think computers and telecommunications companies, those kinds of folks. Specifically, over the last 2 years, we've seen, and we see all of those, but I'd say we see a lot of investment in the U.S. in the insurance space, in the health insurance space in particular. I think because there's been a much broader appeal to direct-to-consumer offerings. Think, the Medicare, you now can get Medicare insurance from a private insurer. The Affordable Care Act has created a whole retail marketplace. And a lot of the health insurers prior to that had captive customer bases, right? So if you didn't like your insurance from your company, pretty much you had no choice but to quit your job, right? Or wait for a year and then maybe re-enroll if they had multiple options. Now there's a lot more ability to switch, particularly if you're retired or if you're in the Affordable Care Act. And so these health insurance companies have been very quickly realizing they have to focus on customer experience, just like everybody else. And then the other ones, I think technology is always disruptive. So people are always looking for better ways. Any company that's embracing contact center automation, chatbots, messaging as a channel for kind of catching the digital consumer is recognizing that for every investment, you have to quantify, are you getting more value or are you creating more inefficiency? So with every investment is an opportunity to challenge, are you getting the return you want? And using solutions like ours, you can actually start to calibrate, where am I getting efficiency? Where am I creating potentially problems that I need to solve? So that's the tech companies and a lot of the more innovative companies, digital commerce companies, et cetera.
Are you seeing the ROI shift away from the efficiency play, maybe more toward improving sales itself? Are you seeing any of that happening in the space?
Yeah, I'll answer the question more broadly. There's really four drivers that often, kind of call the question of, should I be investing in this type of, CX analytics, customer experience analytics? The first is, do I think I have inefficiency and I want to drive it, right? And companies that know that they want to improve margins or they want to rationalize investments are going to do that. The second is, am I looking to basically improve market share, right, and grow revenue? And when we find companies that are either dealing with churn that is below a level of acceptability, they want to reduce churn, or they're launching new products and services, they want to maximize that those new services are going to be generating growth and lift in their either revenue per customer or new customers. They really want to understand what drives brand equity, what drives interest. That's all about driving successful, growth in the business. And you see that with retail, you see that with consumer goods. You even see that with some of the more diversified financial services firms, right, that are trying to go digital and attract a new kind of customer. The third category is what I would describe as the risk reduction category. And in particular, in markets that are regulated, like healthcare, financial services, banking in particular, where there are regulations on consumer financial protection, fair credit, anti-discrimination clauses. It's really important to know that when your customers are doing business with you, you're abiding by those regulations. So we've actually created models that look for the warning signs of a potential regulatory infraction so that a company can identify it, investigate it, resolve it, ideally before it gets to the point of it being a complaint with a regulator. And also just to show that they have good practices for minimizing risk. So it helps them to show that they care, but it also actually reduces the costs of regulatory infractions. And then the final one is anytime you're making major changes, right? So the airline example was one where, you're integrating two companies. That's a major change initiative. Launching a brand new product, right? Anytime there's a change initiative, you want to make sure that you're listening particularly acutely to the customer to make sure that that change is producing a desired end result, not a negative consequence of some sort.
Sid, what gets you most excited about the future of this? What are you seeing out there that you can talk about?
Sure.
But what gets you really jazzed up about where this is heading?
So it's been interesting to watch and to be part of, using all these new technologies that are able to understand humans, right? And even just since we started Clarabridge to now, the complexity and the sophistication of the algorithms that we're using to really understand human interactions, to pick up on subtle markers of, emotion, intention, et cetera. It's not even just words, it's how words are used, it's silence and other things. It's actually kind of weird in a way and almost kind of overwhelming that I think we're not far away from a time when you'll be able to interact with a computer as naturally as you and I are talking to each other right now, right? And there's sort of 2 or 3 steps that have to happen. The first is understanding, which is, the computer understands what you're saying. And I think we're approaching that level of peak capability over the next few years. The second is responding back, right? Which is now training a machine, not just how to understand the intent of the human, but the best way to respond. This is sort of, if you have an Alexa or, one of these Google assistants in your house, I challenge my Alexa from time to time because I want to know if it's getting better. And I ask it to tell me stories. I actually asked it, my wife thought I was super weird, but a few years ago, I asked Alexa to sing me happy birthday because it was my birthday, and it did. And it was actually not bad too. So, it's becoming more human. And I think that as it gets better at dynamically generating responses, which is something that we're doing right now. We're researching, how do I create an environment where Clarabridge doesn't just provide analytical insights, it provides human, adaptable, dynamic sort of responses to questions. At that point, we hit a point where I think we could imagine computers as we know them disappear, right? They are no longer attached to keyboards. They're basically visual and audio devices that we talk to like we talk to other human beings. And I think that companies like Clarabridge who are developing this sort of capability to not just understand, but to detect empathy, intention, emotion, loyalty, are going to be, I think, on the forefront of a new kind of computing and a new kind of application space. Where it goes, I don't actually know, but I know that we're doing some pretty cool stuff. And I think there's a lot of potential for this to get even more interesting over the next 5-10 years.
I guess that brings up an interesting thought for me, one that we didn't prep for, so we can see where this goes.
Okay.
As computers become more able to understand, to respond, where does that leave humans from a perspective of the employees? Do you think employees are going to actually get better at listening because they've got these devices to help them? Or are companies going to kind of go the direction, there might be a split here too, are companies going to go the direction saying, let's use technology to listen because it's better than training our people how to listen? I see that happen some places a little bit. We're not quite there yet though.
Yeah, no, it's an important question. And, I'd be lying if I didn't wonder, if I'm helping to create, the Terminator, right? And in 10 years, will these machines take over and I'm going to regret everything I've done in my life? I hope not, right? Because I think that what's happening is there's going to be two primary, at least two, hopefully more, but there'll be at least two primary things that humans are going to have to do to adapt, right? And to kind of stay in control of this transformation. The first is in any customer-facing business, there's sort of the stuff that computers can handle, right? And if you look back 50 years, it was tracking dollars and cents and managing logistics. It was all the quantitative stuff. The computers are going to kind of ebb into being able to handle a certain kind of interaction and a certain kind of emotional understanding response. But anything that it doesn't understand, it has to go to a human. So humans still have to be the consultative problem solvers, the advanced support, the fine things that you haven't taken the time to train a computer how to do. And so we are going to have to be more and more involved in the consultative relationship with our customers than ever before, because computers are only going to do certain things very, very well, but other things not at all. And then the second thing is, I think that, just like the industrial age ushered in a generation of factory workers, right? The knowledge revolution of AI is going to usher in a whole new generation of basically machine trainers, right? If you think about a computer as a machine learning algorithm, people have to train machines, right? And I think that we are only on the very, very edge of all the things you can train machines to do. So there will be a whole new, I think, generation of work that needs to be done to train machines on all the things that they could do. So, if you have kids, teach your kids a little bit about machine learning. That's what I'm trying to teach my kids about, because I think that's the future, right? And again, all the physical stuff is still going to be there too. But I do think that the two new generations are the consultative, tier 1+ stuff that computers can't do, and then making sure that those machines keep getting better, because they don't always get better on their own. They need humans to sort of guide them in the right direction.
It's so exciting to me as a consumer to hear this, because I know it's going to make experiences better. Mm-hmm. And I just thought of an experience. This just happened on Saturday. I had switched cell phone providers, and my legal name is Ann. So I registered it under Ann, but I go by Betsy. So when I set up my account online, I put it in as Betsy. Well, then I had an issue, and I was talking to a rep on their chat, and he would not give me access to my account because it didn't say Ann, and I said I was Betsy. But when I log on to pay my bill, it says, "Welcome, Betsy." And so those two things were not connected. Yep. And so it locked me out. I had no access through this experience to my own account. And I get the security concern and all of that, but if their systems had been connected, it would have been easy for the human to see, oh, of course, we get it. So I don't know. I just think it's very exciting as consumers. Some people, I think, are scared by it because it does feel a little Terminator-like sometimes. But for me as a consumer, I think it's great because it will enhance the experience. Go ahead, Sid.
No, actually, well, I was going to just kind of touch on a point you made about the bringing the data together. There is an interesting question you didn't ask, but I'll go there, which is when you start linking together a lot of this data, you do create an aggregate kind of awareness of you as a person. And there are questions that people are asking. They're certainly asking it in California with the data privacy, GDPR in Europe, around how much can a company collect on you and what control do you have over that data that they collect on you. When you start to bring in this kind of subjective information, the conversations, the interactions, not just how much you spend and what your loyalty card number is, people do want to know that they have some ability to control that information. And I do think that there will be an era, it's coming. I mean, it's some of the more, privacy-focused societies are already thinking about it, but it is coming. And we should welcome that, right? I mean, people should be able to say to a company, I want you to delete everything you have on me, and know that they will do that. Because that, at the end of the day, is, I think you're right, in a free society. So this is something that we track, and I don't think it's bad, right? I think you're going to see the twin progression of people using machines to learn more and more and to be better at serving you, but also customers need to be able to retain some control over that if they want to delete themselves from a system.
Yeah.
They'll go together.
It never even occurred to me until you just said that would even be something I could ask a company to do. It's never even occurred to me.
If you're in Europe and California, but not in the rest of the U.S. So
not in Dayton, Ohio. Switching gears, Sid, one of the things we love to do on our show is give an opportunity for our guests to do a shout out to a nonprofit or some kind of community involvement. And I know that you're very involved with entrepreneurs.
I am.
And so can you share with us a little bit about that and let us know about the organizations that you are involved in?
Yeah, there's one that I've been involved with now going probably on 10 years. It's a group called NIFTY, which is the National Federation for Teaching Entrepreneurship. They were started, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago by a sort of a businessman, reformed businessman, who realized that, in fact, that teaching kids, particularly kids in underserved communities, just the basics of thinking about the laws of supply and demand and P&L, and giving them the basic tools to build a business plan, gave them the confidence to be able to think about starting a business or even joining a business and kind of building their way up through learning and growing. And the end event every year for the kids that go through this program, it's taught in the high schools of schools around the country, is an annual business planning competition where people submit business plans. They go through a regional and then national judging competitions, and the winning proposals end up getting scholarship funding and so on. And I've been involved initially on as a coach in the business plans. I was on the board of the local NIFTY here in the DC area. And I'm now more of a supporter from afar as life has gotten busy for me. But I love what they do. And I think that giving kids just the ability to see the value of math, of thinking, of planning, and of being able to see an idea turn into reality, I think is so important to help people, grow and develop themselves as people. So.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I've been involved in something similar as a mentor in the entrepreneurship program at the University of Dayton. Mm-hmm. And we would just have teams of kids, and they would have a real life, basically consulting project with an entrepreneurial venture, just to get kind of a inside look at how things go. And they would always have one that had a social aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
And
social entrepreneurship, yeah.
Yeah. And I just read where one of the teams, what they were working on, it was at the very, very beginning of the concept, is now a reality. So it's just really fun that these kids got to have input into the research and the, just how is this all going to work, and the numbers and all of that. So it sounds like a great organization. Thanks for sharing that.
No, very welcome. Yeah, definitely check them out if you have interest. They're a great group. So,
well, Sid, how can people get a hold of you if they want to connect and take the conversation a little bit further?
Sure. Well, I'm on all the platforms. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn at Sid Banerjee at Clarabridge, or feel free to drop me an email, which is sid.banerjee@clarabridge.com. And I'm happy to connect and continue the conversation offline.
Great, Sid. Thank you so much. We'll put the links to that in the show notes so people can easily reach out to you. Thank you so much for your time. This is fascinating. I just think it opens people's minds, and it's exciting to see where this is all going. And we really appreciate you being here today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And thanks again for a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Sid.
This is one of the most fascinating interviews I think we've had. And I say that not just because I have this relationship that goes back 14 or so years with Sid. In truth, I would not be in this space the way I am if it had not been for my early collaboration with Clarabridge when they were a new company, when I was new to the CX space. And what we learned together was interesting and helpful to move the organization ahead. And I've worked with different clients of Clarabridge's coincidentally over time. And it's always fascinating to me to understand the difference between a company and the leaders who really want to listen to their customer, and they put the technologies in place to do so, especially large companies. So they're listening to millions of people every single day or every single week, and then deriving this information that they can rapidly innovate and improve and change how their organization engages with customers, change the products or the offerings, the services that they provide. So for me, this was an exciting interview and something that's very insightful as to where we are today and where we're headed down the road.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tony. And I think, when he was talking about how they piece this all together to ultimately create a better experience for the customer. So it's not listening just for listening's sake or having stockpiles of data so you can say you have it, but it's really how can we use this information and this data to really transform the experience for the customer, which at the end of the day is what it's all about, right? It's all about the customer. So that's what I love about how Clarabridge kind of blends the technology with the ultimate experience for the customer. All right, great. Well, I agree with you, Tony. That was a very exciting episode and conversation. Really grateful to Sid for taking the time out to be with us today. And if you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, we would greatly appreciate a review on whatever platform you listen to us on. So just know in advance how much we would appreciate your thoughts and feedback. And until the next time, I'm Betsy Westhafer along with Tony Bodoh, and we'll see you next time on the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.